right, we're rocking and rolling on another edition of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with the big homie Trace Barbatelli, the myth, the man, the legend. Trace, what's going on, dude? Glad to have you on and connect for an episode.
Yeah, I'm stoked to be on the podcast, man. Yeah, this is going to be awesome. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Although it was, I'll have to admit, I think it was a twist in the arm. I think you invited yourself on, which I was happy that you did.
That does sound like something I would do. I usually just assertively say, oh, hey, we should go do this. And then people are like, all right, sounds good. And then one thing led to another. And here we are sitting, listening and staring at each other.
Oh, funny stuff. Well, dude, I'm excited to talk about all kinds of stuff, rehash some of our trips in the past. You and I have been tripping buddies for I'd call it since we're 17, right? When we spent 45 days together in the Brooks Range of Alaska.
Yeah, back in 2007, we were both, that's when I first met you. We were both participants at Camp Manitowish, and we were doing intermediate outpost trips. And I didn't really know you that well, and then I remember seeing you because then the following year I did a Western, you did a Canuck, backpacking and canoeing. And then we got to know each other a little bit. And then, yeah, we ended up doing that trip together. And I think it's safe to say you're really like my first adventure partner.
That's an honor.
Yeah. Yeah. It is an
great.
honor.
Yeah, we go back, man. Just 17-year-old knuckleheads, and it's crazy now. Camp Manitowish YMCA is they have been a sponsor of the show in the past, and it's where we met and where we both worked there on staff for a long time too. Went there as campers, as kids, and yeah, went on these extraordinary trips. I did the 30-day canoe trip, which you mentioned was the Canuck, and then together we did that 45-day backpacking trip in the Brooks Range of Alaska. And yeah, what a cool place, and a lot of cool people come out of there. But it's funny to think about all the trips and stuff we've done since then too. There's been a lot, man.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of a mixed bag. Definitely a mix of a lot of hiking, a lot of skiing, a lot of boating. We did a fair amount of ice climbing together. Overall, yeah, some pretty spectacular trips.
No doubt, man. Take me through your just kind of quickly, your outdoor life, I guess, and then I want to dive into some of our trips from the past with that 45-day backpacking trip and all the other ones. But tell me a little bit about your kind of trajectory with the outdoors and what you're doing now, and kind of how you fell in love with it, I guess.
Yeah. So I really, I remember actually being a 12-year-old kid. I was a camper at Camp Manitowish, and I didn't really jive with play groups as a kid. I wasn't a very good student. A lot of acting out and doing, misbehaving in the classroom, that type of thing, messing around with my older sisters, that type of deal.
Not much has changed.
I remember, I remember going to camp and really enjoying just being outside. And I remember as a 12-year-old, thinking my 12-year-old brain was literally thinking oh my God, I can focus on multiple tasks at the same time. And I am not acting out, and I'm engaged with my peers and my leader. And this is I don't know what's going on. And it turns out I learned that I was just experiencing what it felt like to be calm for the first time as a 12-year-old. So then that was totally how I got that's what ignited my passion. And then I continued through the Manitowish progression, and I learned all the basic tripping skills there: expedition planning, logistics. You learn also hard skills backcountry techniques, how to repair stuff. And then also a blend of soft skills, where you pretty much learn to engage with other people. And then, returning as a staff member at Camp Manitowish, I was a counselor. I worked their leadership program, and then I started leading their expeditionary level trips. with my buddy Mike Schneck in 2018. I returned to the Brooks Range, which was like a lifelong dream. You know, since I was 17 years old, I had dreamed of going back to the Brooks Range. And so 9 years later, I ended up having the opportunity to return. And then it was an amazing trip. And then it ended. And I was like, oh, God, now what? Like, I just fulfilled a lifelong dream. And kind of in the interim, like through those years at camp, I also started working wilderness therapy. I worked in wilderness therapy in northern Wisconsin for a few years for a program called New Vision Wilderness. And I learned a lot of winter skills in particular there. So we were living outside. It was expedition style. And that kind of continued my sort of progression and passion. And then, 2018, I go back to the Brooks Range. I leave. I have a little bit of an existential crisis. And then through a mutual friend of ours, I don't know if you remember our pal in Minnesota, Mike Dunn. We used to go ice climbing with him at Sandstone Ice Park, but he introduced me to the owner of the Zion Guide Hub. So I moved to Zion, and, never having gone canyoneering before, not really learned. I had rock climbed a lot at that point, but I had never crack climbed, and it's like desert splitter cracks out there. So it was a lot of new things for me. I did that for a few seasons. And
if I can interject here, how did you get into ice climbing? Because you've been working at the world famous Ouray ice climbing park in Ouray, Colorado for how many years now?
Yeah, I was about to get to that. So I learned how to, I learned how to ice climb in 2012 when I visited our mutual friend, Dan Fishell. Dan Fishell was an ice farmer at the Ouray Ice Park. I was a sophomore in college, and I come out to visit him during one of my spring breaks. And so at that point, I had been rock climbing with my university rock club. And, I went to the gym a lot, but ice climbing was like this whole new world for me. And so we go climbing. My first climb ever was actually it was a backcountry Ouray climb called the Dexter's Slab. So it was like 3 or 4 pitches of ice. And Dan is a little bit of a sandbagger. So he was like, oh, you've never ice climbed before? Cool. Let's go climb some multi-pitch ice. And then I was like, all right, sounds good. Like having no idea what I was getting myself into. And then, so that's kind of where it all started. And then I definitely can credit Dan to, learning to backcountry ski as well. I went backcountry skiing with him for the first time, which was totally another sandbag. But even though I was sandbagged on both of these things, I kind of came out the other end of it and really doubled down and was like, oh, these are things that I really want to get good at. So I'm going to make some progression and try to get good at these things. And so it just like continued to fuel that initial passion. I kind of felt like that 12-year-old kid again when I was skiing or when I was climbing ice or when I was paddling a river. So, and then I actually did a lot of ice climbing when I was living in the Midwest working at wilderness therapy. I did, Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, beautiful, beautiful, towering ice climbs over Lake Superior, and the waves are crashing beneath you. It is quite a surreal experience. And then you and me have done quite a bit of climbing together at the Sandstone Ice Park. So we knew some folks there that lived locally, and we kind of befriended them. And then, we did a lot of like winter camping and climbing at the ice park together. And
one of my
still to this day,
one of my favorite times too. We got to get into a little bit of shenanigans because, of course, anytime we're camping together, there's got to be some sort of shenanigans. But when we were camping at the Sandstone Ice Park. Yeah, in Minnesota, and we were camping there overnight, and we were the only ones there. And after a day spent climbing, we were the only ones there winter camping to climb the next day. And of course, winter camping, we had a couple sodas with us, and popped a couple pops, and then by the end of the night, I had some Roman candles, and we were shooting Roman candles at the ice climbs and just watching it explode on the ice and just like light up the whole wall of frozen waterfalls as the Roman candle exploded on it. It was just like the most beautiful, but also, you know, stupid thing to do. It's so fun.
Yeah, we were definitely lighting off fireworks in like a municipal park, which was totally not allowed. And we had consumed some beverages. I remember a bottle of whiskey was in the mix. And actually, I remember it as I was cooking you dinner and you light the Roman candle and you like shoot it at me from point blank range.
I think
And
that's how
so
it started.
then that sort of like escalated it. And then at that point, it's honestly amazing that we didn't get fined or, arrested or something. Cause yeah, we were like two dumb, drunk young kids, like shooting fireworks at each other and drinking and in a public park anyway.
Good
But
times though.
I do remember climbing some really awesome ice there that weekend. And so if any of the ice farmers are listening, that was a long time ago. Okay. So I wouldn't do that anymore.
Oh, it's so funny, so funny. Yeah, ice climbing is crazy though, and uh, what is it? What is it versus rock climbing that draws you, or what are I guess the big differences? But why ice versus rock? Um, and it's just so crazy to me, just still thinking about it, like describing it to people, like what is ice climbing? Oh, there's a frozen waterfall, and then you go up with two sharp picks and you screw in screws in the frozen waterfall and then you climb it. It's like what?
Yeah, it's weird. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. It's weird, and when you describe it to people, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And climbing as a medium is very engaging. It's very physically and mentally challenging, and I was drawn to climbing because you are kind of like your own opponent that you need to defeat, if that makes any sense.
It does.
So I love. I would say I like rock climbing. Rock climbing is fun. I enjoy it. I do love ice. That's kind of like really my happy place. And I think that there's a few factors that I really enjoy about it. One thing is it's very dynamic. It's constantly changing. So you go to climb a route at the beginning of the season. It's like barely formed. It's steep. It's kind of thin. It's hard to protect with ice screws. The ice is more brittle. And then as, the season goes on, the ice climb continues to grow. And then you come back to that same ice climb, a handful of weeks or even months later, and it's a completely different climb. So that's what I love about it. It's like ever changing and very dynamic. And it's kind of like an all encompassing form of exploration. You need to do research ahead of time. You need to pay attention to avalanche conditions. You need to pay attention to temperature gradients and changes from the daytime to the nighttime, and that really, really cold overnight temperature. And that really, let's say it's like warm and sunny the next day, that could be, sometimes a 50, 60-degree temperature difference, and that changes the ice. And so you have to, through experience and practice, you have to learn how to read it and engage with it. You as like anything, you practice anything, you're going to get used to it. You're going to know how to work with it. You're going to know how to ascend something. So I think that all those things are really, really what attracted me to ice, when I started climbing in 2012. So yeah.
Sounds not too different from paddling rivers, right? Dynamic. We've paddled a lot of
Uh,
rivers.
I honestly, and I've had this conversation with a couple people and they look at me all side-eyed like I'm an idiot or something. And so it's kind of funny because paddling rivers and ice climbs really are very similar. For rivers, you need to be paying attention to water levels. And let's say you need to account for runoff volumes. Let's say you have a really snowy winter or a very mild, not very snowy winter. That is going to change the runoff cycle, and that runoff then feeds into the rivers, and so you go to a river, you paddle a river in the spring, and it's flooded. It's just like the runoff is really high, and you then travel. And again, paddling rivers are very engaging. That's definitely something that attracts both of us to doing that. It's like very dynamic. And then you return to that same section of river, sometimes weeks, months, years later, and the water level dropped, and now it's like a completely different section. And even if you're not necessarily paddling whitewater, I would say even if you're paddling just like a river with no whitewater features, it's still different because you have to take the current, how the current is pushing you around into consideration, and then like features and various hazards and
Totally.
put-ins, takeouts, crossing underneath bridges. And so is the act of paddling a canoe or a kayak the same thing as, swinging tools or climbing ice? No, but obviously there's very, very real and kind of subtle similarities between
Sure.
those two activities.
Makes me think of, and of course I'm going to butcher it, but the saying, what is it? It's a man can never step in the same river twice, for he is not for the river is not the same, and he is not the same man, or what, it was something along those lines.
That sounds
But
pretty
yeah,
good to me. I would have never known you were so profound, dude. Jeez. I guess you're smarter than you look.
always changing rivers. And
Very
dude,
much so. Very much.
we've done a lot of river trips, and that's out of all these outdoor things that we love. I think that's maybe the biggest passion we share. Of course, skiing too. I'm not as big as a climber as you are. I'm an angler, a fisherman, but we both love to paddle, man. Canoeing, kayaking, you name it, but canoeing in particular. We've done a lot of river trips. Let's start with the last one we were just on. You came on a guided buffalo roamer trip to Moab on the mighty Green River this past October. What was your takeaway from the buffalo roamer trip on the Green? It was a blast, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a blast, and it was in May. It wasn't in
Oh,
October.
I'm sorry. You're right. It was in May. I got one coming up this October.
And so it was an awesome trip. It was a really cool crew. There was this lady named Andrea, and she had been on a buffalo roamer trip before. And then her dad Jim came along, and then Jackie and Cheryl were some ladies from the Dakotas. And it was a really, really random mixed bag. Mixed bag of people. We all had like varying levels of experience. And for me, I had, I paddled Cataract Canyon before, a few years ago with my girlfriend when we started dating. But I really haven't explored many desert rivers at that point. It was very new to me. So you see like the towering, sandstone mesas, and you see how the river over the course of, tens of millions of years has carved out like these stunning canyons. And the water is really interesting. The water is like chocolate milk. I just called it like a chocolate milk river. And so
God,
even though
so
you kind of, well, and that's the thing is like, you look at that chocolate milk river and I was like, do I really want to swim in that? And it was May, it was hot. And then I jump in that water and I walk out of the river and I totally feel like $1,000,000. And so I swam in the river every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was also spring runoff, like we were just talking about. So we had a lot of snow out west this past winter, particularly in Utah and Northern California had, so much snow. So the current was really pushy. And I remember we encountered some really challenging wind that first day. And that was also like kind of interesting because we didn't really know each other that well. We were still kind of forming as a group. And so that was like a big introduction. It was like, oh wow, like not only are we getting to know each other, we have like these kind of challenging conditions. And then I remember the wind subsided, and Andrea made some really good cocktails, and then Will cooked up some dinner. He was cooking dinner every night. And overall it was like stunning trip. And I didn't get to paddle with everybody, but I paddled with most people on that trip.
Yeah, it was
So
great.
yeah, that was a great time. We
Yeah,
got really lucky with weather, and besides the wind that first day, the weather was like super chill, and it was like beautiful desert spring,
gosh, it's just so
cool
amazing.
nights, warm days.
Yeah, I'm going back in October with another trip. And then I'll be coming out with the 2024 schedule. Hopefully, not in the too distant future. I'm still working through a few things, but man, it is just so beautiful. Anytime I get there, I try to. It's like Labyrinth Canyon in particular, and Stillwater Canyon, which are these two canyons on the Green River. Man, but the whole Green River and all those Southwest, a lot of those Southwest rivers is just like towering red rock, canyons everywhere, like awesome little side hikes. And yeah, it was cool with our group because like you said, it was such kind of a mixed bag. We had people from all over New York City, Georgia, everywhere from 72 to, early 30s, and about everywhere in between. And everyone got along great, and everybody had a blast. And I can't wait to get back.
Yeah, it was such an awesome trip. I've yet to paddle. So it's kind of funny. I'm sort of, the way that it works, for listeners that have never paddled that area, is on the Green River, you enter Labyrinth Canyon, and then you enter Stillwater Canyon, and then you paddle into this area called the Spanish Bottom, and that is the entrance of Cataract Canyon. And Cataract Canyon has some like awesome whitewater. And that was like my first introduction to like a Western desert river. But I'm kind of doing it in reverse order, because the first thing I did in 2018 is I paddled Cataract Canyon, and then I ended up going on this Buffalo Roamer trip to Labyrinth Canyon. And so now I have to paddle Stillwater Canyon. And then once I do that, I would like to combine all three canyons in one trip. Just feasibly do something over the course of like 2 weeks or something like that. I think that would be like a really fun adventure.
That would be. What have been some of the the camping trips that stick out to you over the course of your young adventurous life? Is there one or two that come out that stick out as like momentous or memorable trips?
I would say I did a 25-day backpacking trip through Camp Manitowish as a 16-year-old, and our mutual pal Ryan Wagner was my leader on that trip. And that was another trip, looking back, where we had a very kind of a strange mixed bag of a group.
And it's crazy too, looking back on it, not to interrupt you here, but at that point we were 16, right? 16-year-old kids, very fortunate.
Yeah, right.
Very fortunate to be able to go to this camp and have our passions be lit. But it's so funny looking back on it, thinking like, yeah, the leader of this trip, Ryan, was maybe 21, 22 at the time, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't tell you exactly. He was definitely early 20s for sure.
Yeah,
and
it's kind of like funny. 22, but yeah, it's him and 5, knucklehead 16-year-olds for 25 days backpacking. And where were you, in the Bitterroots in Montana, or where were you?
No, we were in the Wind Rivers in Wyoming, and I actually haven't gone back to the Wind Rivers since that trip in 2008. So it's definitely
also one of the places, as far as mountains go. Man, like for me, it's the Mississippi, the Yukon, mostly the Mississippi. But as far as mountains, the Wind Rivers, holy cow, man. I've done 3 trips there, and every time it's like, it's just endless. It's the most beautiful mountains, and it has the biggest water. It's like the alpine lakes in the Wind Rivers are just like filled with fish, like no trails to most of them. And it's just like that is one of the most beautiful and my favorite mountain ranges in the world. And I need to get back there sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up skiing, so I had been out west, like on family ski trips and stuff as a kid. But that Western was very impactful for me because I was, as a 16-year-old, experiencing the Mountain West for the first time. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so a lot of lakes and stuff and rivers, but I never really engaged with mountains until that trip. And once again, I'm like gonna refer back to like 12-year-old Trace. It was without a doubt one of those moments where it just was like such a profound like discovery. Like I felt like I really figured a lot out about me on that trip as like a young, confused teenage kid. And Ryan, he was a ex-Marine and he was a total hard ass on the trip. However, even though he was a bit of a hard ass, we still we had like a really good connection. And Ryan, I felt like overall, like on the trip, he was my leader. And then once we were off the trip, we stayed in touch, and still are in touch after all these years. And then it was like a smooth transition from like being a leader to being a friend and, a mentor in that regard, especially. So that was like really, really huge for me, just experiencing the Mountain West in the summertime. Cause yes, the Wind Rivers are delightful. It was
just the water is so big. That's, of course, speaking of the Green River, that's where the headwaters of the Green River.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. Right. And I would say that one as like a kid, of course, the Alaskan in 2009, that was probably arguably like the most influential experience in my life. We had a really, really, the trip days. You and me were on. That was, I don't know how else to put it. It was the most influential experience in my life. And it was on that trip where I realized at that point that I had a strong passion for being outside. And I was like, okay, well, I need to find a job where I need to work outside. And so that's really what led me on my path to, working all those years at Manitowish and working in wilderness therapy at New Vision and going into commercial guiding. That was and that wasn't obviously the only discovery I had on that trip. I mean, both the Western and the Alaskan that we went on are physically extremely challenging. You're carrying very, very heavy packs on permafrost, on terrain with no trails, and you're getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. And you're doing these huge river crossings with heavy backpacks on. And it really adds to backpacking. That type of terrain is very, very challenging. When I went between 2009 and 2018, like there was a huge explosion in the use of pack rafts. And so I remember in 2009, like not really seeing any pack rafters out there, and then returning in 2018 and everybody has these pack rafts. And I remember being like, whatever, we're doing this old school, like screw these guys. And then we have to do this massive river crossing, and we run into these guys with pack rafts. And we're like, how did you guys cross the Sag River, the Sagavanirktok River? And they were like, oh, we just blew up our boats and paddled right across. It was so easy. It took like an hour. Whereas we had to do like a massive reroute that took us days, and it was a ration where, we almost ran out of food. It was a total disaster. And then that kind of opened my eyes to, that Manitowish has taught me a lot of really, really amazing skills. And I'm forever grateful to that place. But that was like an introduction. I was like, oh, there are other ways to explore the outdoors, compared to how we do it at Manitowish.
Totally.
And that was, they're really, really cool.
Dude, that is so high on my list. I wanted to get it done this summer, but didn't get it organized. We talked about doing it, my buddy Jackson and I might have included you in the loop too, about doing a pack rafting trip up to the Brooks. I want to do that again. That's also high on the list. Just amazing. I'm curious to hear, after all of these years, your recount of our bear charge incident, our run in with the mighty Grizz on that Alaskan trip. Because after all these years, the story ebbs and flows, and I have a pretty clear recollection of how I remember it going down. I'm interested to hear what your story is. So set the scene for us.
It was hot. It was pretty warm. Maybe we were just hot because we were just sweating and carrying heavy packs, but it was like kind of musty and humid and
that's really setting the scene.
Yeah, there you go. Set the scene. Well, yeah. So we were hiking along and we drop our packs for a little bit. I think we were just taking a snack break or whatever. And then Ian Derber, one of our peers on that trip, we were getting our stuff back on. And I just remember him looking over.
6 guys in total, 4 of us, 4 participants, and then 2 leaders, 20.
Yeah, that's right. And then Ian looks over and he's like, oh, whoa, there's a bear right there. And we all turn around and maybe like 75 yards away, it's like across this gully. So we were standing on one side of the gully, the bear was standing on the other. And this bear just like dips his head and starts running at us at full speed. And then at that point, it was kind of funny. At the time, I was totally freaking out. I was like, there is a wild animal. And I was like, I'm going to die. Like this, it's going to like maul us. And anyway, super irrational 17-year-old trace, just like having this like.
It's not that irrational when you see a big, massive grizzly bear in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, charging towards you or running towards you. It's not that irrational.
Yeah, it was. And then so I remember like kind of standing and we were like unzipping our jackets. We only had 2 cans of bear spray at the time. They don't do that at Manitowish anymore. They send everybody out with bear spray. But we only had 2 things of bear spray. And I remember like we were kind of bunched up. And then I remember like walking to the left to like expand the group, and then Dan Fishell was like, hey, where are you going? Like, he was totally thinking I was like about to dip away in the group. I'm like, no, I'm just like over here. Anyway, so all this was happening while the bear was charging us and it was full speed. And so it closed the gap from like 75 yards to 25 to 20 yards or so in seconds. I have never seen any wild animal move that fast in my life. And then I remember at that point, we could all tell that the bear it wasn't a cub, but it wasn't a full adult. It was pretty young. And anyway, so the bear gets there and I'm like, oh, this bear wasn't that big. No big deal. Well, then the bear stands up on its hind legs and like lets out like a roar, huge roar. And I was like, that bear looks pretty it looks pretty big to me now. Anyway, so I just remember
you can let it fly,
the bear then. Oh, okay. Well, I was fucking freaking out big time. Like, I just remember this thing was like standing on its hind legs. It was like it was like let out this like roar. It was probably one of the most majestic and terrifying things I still to this day have ever seen. And then it dropped down on all fours and it took off in the other direction. And we just had like so much adrenaline. I just remember like pounding our chest, being like, yeah, what up? Like, that's it, like, like not scared of you. Yeah, not scared of you. Like, whatever. And I remember being like, once the adrenaline kind of subsided, I felt like a little weak in the knees and I had to just sit down for a minute and just kind of like let my body process. And I would say, yeah, and I would say, because when you think about it, like, you're 17 years old, you're still a kid. And then you have an experience like that and it releases like adrenaline and a bunch of cortisol in your brain and your nervous system for the first time ever. And I just remember being like a really, really intense, crazy experience and not being able to describe like why I felt weak in the knees or why I felt dizzy. And then, that I learned later, I was like, oh, that was just like my first real adrenaline rush,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
so
I remember it pretty much exactly the same. Yeah, he started out on like a hill to the right. We were standing on another hill. There's a little valley. And how many years ago was this now? It was 2009. So
that was 2009.
yeah. So hit me with the math.
Don't ask me to do mental math. Don't.
Oh, God, you're embarrassing. Okay, regardless. So he runs down the little gully, and he like disappears, and we're like, okay, I don't know where he went. And then sure enough, he pops up on the same side as our goalie. We see him pop up. He runs towards us. We all kind of group up and are like, hey bear, hey bear, hey bear, trying to look big. And then, yeah, like you said, he stops maybe like 50 feet or so and kind of stands up and wins us, kind of smells the air. And then he puts his head down and fucking charges straight at us.
Mm-hmm.
And we are just like, yeah, shitting our pants, and comes straight at us, stops, stands on his hind legs, shows his teeth at like 20 feet. And we're like, oh my God. And then he just stays there, turns around and just sprints off. And it was just like, holy cow. They said, if he had taken one more step, they were ready to release the bear spray, which I think they say is a range of like 12 feet or something.
Yeah, it wouldn't really have done anything at that point. And I actually think, looking back, I remember, I think what I said earlier was like 20 yards. It was a hell of a lot closer than 20 yards. It was like 20 or 30 feet. And I remember that because I wrote about it in my journal that night. Like I kept a log on the trip, a personal journal on the trip, which is something they encourage you to do, especially in those longer trips at camp. And I remember writing that, and I was like, really? Is it really 20 to 30 feet? And then like, I don't know, a year ago, maybe I was scanning through that journal. I was like, oh, yep, it was pretty damn close. Like definitely too close for comfort. You don't want to be 30 feet away from a wild grizzly bear that has never seen humans before. Likely has never seen humans before.
Two quick stories for you. One bear stories. One recently. I just told this on another episode, but it's okay. It's a good story. It's not that good, but I was on the St. Croix River this summer with my buddy Matt. We were doing a fishing trip, Upper St. Croix in Wisconsin. And also, I can hear you just kind of jiggling something on that table. Your mic's picking it up. So I was on the Upper St. Croix, and it was my first trip paddleboarding, actually. So I took the paddleboard out for 4 days, 3 nights, which was awesome. Worked really well. But on the last day, they were ahead of me in the canoe fishing. I was behind them in the paddleboard, and we were coming around a bend, and I heard this really loud noise. The only way I can describe it is it sounded like an old Southern, good old boy, hollering. It was a really strange sound. And the canoe in front of me thought that it was me. I was like, oh, it wasn't me. It was from the woods. And they kept paddling, and I kept kind of looking. And then I look over, and all of a sudden I see this massive mama black bear flying up this tree, just as fast as can be. And then it comes back down, and its cub was there with it. There's 2 cubs there, and the cub runs up the tree, and then the mama bear sprints up the tree behind it. And I saw him doing this to 3 or 4 trees in the area, and they were moving so unbelievably fast climbing that tree. It was crazy.
Oh yeah. Black bears are very, very good runners and climbers. 100%. Yeah.
No doubt. And then the other funny one is in your neck of the woods, or your former neck of the woods, in Montana on the Smith River. We did a trip. I did a trip on the Smith in 2018, I think, and maybe 2019. And my buddy Jackson, lots of bears on the Smith. And my buddy Jackson was in the outhouse, using the open door porta potty when a black bear started strolling into camp. And everybody's in camp, and he's like running out of the outhouse with his pants around his ankles, like bear, like stumbling, like toilet paper trailing from his foot as he's yelling bear. We're like, oh my god! And one of the guys goes,
with his dingling flapping around. That's quite the image.
Exactly. Another guy comes out with a pot and pan and starts banging it and like running at the bear. The bear ran around and turned out. But yeah, I'll never forget that. So funny seeing him run out with like his pants around his ankles. Black bear.
Yeah. And in Montana, they totally have grizzlies up there. And it's fortunately I never had a bear encounter while I was exploring up there. But you heard stories all the time about hunters or fishermen or boaters just like having an encounter. Wild animals are to be feared and respected. And it's a really stern reminder of that,
Trying to think of some of the other river trips we've done. Did we do, you didn't do the North Fork of the Flathead up in Montana with me, did you? We did one day trip.
No, I did paddle the North Fork of the Flathead recently with my buddy Dan Barrick.
Amazing, isn't it? Where'd you start?
I don't know. I wrote it down. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
I
just remember
this is the North Fork of the Flathead forms the it would be the western boundary of Glacier National Park. And it's just like stunningly beautiful, like super cool. At least when I paddled in the fall in October, I believe. And so all the leaves were turning. It was cold and chilly, but all the leaves were turning, burnt orange, crayons melted all in the sky across the hills. And the water is so clear, and all the pebbles underneath are like that, like pink blue hue. It's just so pretty.
Yeah, I went in the spring, so it was kind of right before the bloom, but they had Montana definitely got snow this past winter, but it was like kind of drier compared to what we got in Western Colorado. But it was definitely still full on runoff, and we paddled that section. I have a small whitewater boat called an OC1, and we were paddling myself and Dan were paddling a couple boats in that section, and we ended up taking out, and we were in that area because we were going to a wedding in Whitefish. So it was like a perfect opportunity to do like a little side adventure. I only spent one full day on the river. However, it is without a doubt on the list going back. And it would be really, really cool to put in at the Canadian border, and then you can take that all the way. Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to, you could take the Flathead pretty much all the way to Whitefish. You know what I mean? So
yeah, you could take it all the way all the way to the Missouri River. Take it to the Yellowstone.
Sure. Yeah. It's going to take you more than a few days to do that one, bud. But yeah. Yeah. She keeps floating. Yeah.
What are some of the other ones? Just trying to go through the list of trips that we've done. I'm trying to think.
We paddled the Kettle River. You remember that?
That's right. In Minnesota.
Yeah, central Minnesota. That was such an awesome. It was like, I remember it being really hot. It was August, and I think you were living in Dakota at the time. And then we did a weekend in Sandstone. What in the winter it is known as the Sandstone Ice Park, but it's just called Robinson Park. It's a really cool area. And then they have rock climbs there. So we did some rock climbing. And I remember we had a fire, no Roman candles this time, no shooting Roman candles,
missed opportunity,
but I know, big missed opportunity. I think we were a little older and a little wiser but I do remember, you had this like awesome Yeti cooler, and you had a bunch of like beers, and you had some goose sausages that you from a big hunt that was in the freezer. Yep. You took it out of the freezer. We had these plans to cook up these goose sausages, and some prick stole your cooler while we were camping.
Yeah, and I had it stashed in the woods somewhere, but not good enough.
Yeah, and I remember because we had camped the previous winter, we were the only ones in there. So I kind of like went in and I was a little ignorant, kind of being like, oh yeah, like it's not that busy, like it'll be fine. And then of course it was the summer and it was beautiful, so there were lots of people there. It definitely wasn't the dead of winter. But we looked for the cooler, no luck. So unfortunately, the Yeti cooler, goose sausages, and about a dozen bottles of beer were lost to some
R.I.P.
Fellow who's
Hopefully,
got bad karma
hopefully
coming.
didn't,
Anyway,
yeah, hopefully he didn't cook the goose sausage all the way through.
yeah, we ended up like kind of just saying like, okay, we're here, let's paddle, let's do
Yeah,
this. Like
and it's an
this
awesome
sucks.
whitewater
This is
river.
Yeah, and so we paddled a section of the Kettle River, and I couldn't exactly tell you where it was or what section it was, but I remember the water was pretty big, and they don't
Yeah,
dam rivers like they do out west. So it's truly like a wild river, and the flows were still pretty high. And then we ended up paddling in my canoe. We had a tandem canoe, and we ran into my buddy Ivan Bartha,
right.
who was like a paddling instructor of mine back in my outdoor ed days. And I ran into him and he's like, so you're taking that canoe down the section of the Kettle? We're like, yeah, dude. And of course we had like, you know, our snacks and goodies, and we had backup beers for the river. He's like, why don't you take some float bags out of my truck and put it in there, put it in the boat. And we were like,
want to have some flotation in there. We're like, oh, we'll be able to run it dry so that the
yeah,
flotation goes in the boat to keep water out. So if you get swamped, you can still keep the boat upright. But we
yeah.
were just naive. We're like, oh yeah, whatever. We'll be able to run it. No biggie. We're in Minnesota. How bad could it be? And then turns out we needed them.
It came in clutch, dude. He saved our ass on that day, because we ended up. I don't think we took any swims that day, but we did take in a lot of water and had to pull over and bail. And then we were doing that. We were running, and I think the Crux Rapid. It was like maybe 2+ or class 3, and it was late season, so it wasn't very big, but there was still some really fun water, and it was awesome. I remember being the only canoeists on the river. We like passed a bunch of kayakers, and there were like these kayakers that were like playing in a wave. And then this one guy like looked up and saw us like barreling straight toward him. And I was in the bow. So you were in the stern. And then I remember he like went wide eyed and like freaked out and got out of the way at the last second.
Damn,
Because, at that point, yeah. So anyway, yeah, we charged through, and I remember it's kind of funny, the water in that area. If you ever explore like those rivers that kind of flow into Lake Superior, it's kind of like it's heavily mineralized and has like a root beer color, if that makes sense. It's like, so
I'm familiar with beer.
It's clear. It's like really, really interesting. Like you take a cup of water and you scoop it, and the water, it's a little murky, but it's fairly clear. It's translucent. You can see through it. But for whatever reason, you're paddling on it, it looks dark. And then we're seeing these awesome cliff bands and that are made of sandstone, different type of sandstone, like what you see in Utah. And then you were like, do you think we could jump off these cliffs? And I was like, dude, I don't know. I'm kind of sketched out about cliff jumping. I don't know if I really want to do it. And then we pull around the corner and we see like this dad with his like 5-year-old daughter, like doing backflips off the cliff. And then we were like, all right, okay, we're doing this. This is like, so I think we spent like an hour just like jumping off the cliffs, and then, fun, yeah, so pulling perfect form, triple backflip. Of course, yeah, and gainers, yeah, quadruples. No, anyway, and then we kept paddling the river, and then we bid fairly well because I was living in Wisconsin and you were living in Dakota, so like that Sandstone area, that was kind of like our middle point. It wasn't really a middle point. It was definitely closer to me than it was to you, but we ended up like having a great time, and it was a great spot to recreate and explore, and we spent summers and winters out there.
Yeah.
And honestly, that region, and shout out to like the Sandstone Ice Park crew, that that place is very, very special. It is truly a gem in the Midwest.
Totally. And there's a lot of good rivers. It's funny. One of the things that I had Cliff Jacobson on the other day, who's an old famous canoeist and written, one of the best-selling canoeing authors. And we were talking kind of about the boundary waters. And I was like, yeah, the boundary waters are great, but there's too many people. I don't like the permit system, and it's a pain in the butt. And then on top of all that, I prefer lakes over rivers. I mean, it's beautiful, it's amazing, but those are the big drawbacks. And he was like, yeah, you're right. He's like, it's funny, if you just go on your local river, wherever you are in the U.S. right now, go, the nearest river to you, put a canoe or kayak in there, and you will see absolutely nobody. You will see far, far, far less people than you see in the boundary waters or in, what are some of these other areas? Boundary waters is the big one, but all of these permitted type places.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the local rivers that are around. There's so much beauty and so much access to be had that is just like up for grabs and unexplored compared to some of these big name places,
Yeah, I think that's like one thing that you and me have in common is you and me are very passionate canoeists. And because I would argue canoeing is a little bit of a dying art. And particularly...
Yes and no. Yes and no. I say this only because being in the Midwest now, I spent a lot of time in the West, and I've been in the Midwest now for the last 4 years. This is the heartbeat of canoe country right here, and everybody's still in it, man. In Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota,
Canada, those Canadians sure love canoeing as well. That's so right. Yeah, like, and I'd say in particular with like whitewater canoeing as well, you are at the put in of some river in Montana or Colorado or Utah, and people come up to me and they're like, you're about to paddle that river in that little dinky canoe there. And they've got like some big old raft and like a fishing rig, or they're kayakers. And, we go through it. And then one time I was paddling with my girlfriend, and we paddled this awesome stretch on the Blackfoot outside of Missoula, Montana. And this rafter, he like came up and he wasn't really talking shit, but he was questioning my judgment as a stranger. Sure. He was like, he was like coming up to me and like talking to me and my girlfriend, someone he doesn't even know. He was nice, but like subtle backhanded, like questioning.
Like, what are you doing?
And then we saw this guy at the takeout, and he was like so stoked that we made it through, and he gave us beers, or he gave me beers at the end of it. He's like, you know what, y'all deserve this. And I was like, yeah, don't underestimate me. Like I have good judgment. I have done this before. And it wasn't always that way. When I started getting into whitewater canoeing,
it's hilarious. You're totally right, though. It's especially in the West. Rafting is king in the West. There's just not enough water, flat water, for canoeing in the West, especially like in Colorado and Montana has a lot more. The Northwest has a lot more water than the Southwest or just like the West. But I think there's just not enough water, and rafting is king there. Whereas that's not the case here in the Midwest.
Yeah. I would say like the areas where you're going to see a lot of canoes, not a lot, but more than none, is like Labyrinth and Stillwater Canyon for sure. And maybe like the San Juan River. There's a section of the San Juan that you could probably do in a canoe. There's definitely big water on the San Juan River, but there are sections that people can do. And I'm sure there are other ones that I just haven't been on or explored yet. And so that's kind of like a big thing for me. I love canoeing so much just because it's something that's not as common. And it's like a sense of pride almost. And also we grew up going to Manitowish. And so that is really where like I attribute a lot of my paddling skills. Like the most of my paddling skills started at Manitowish, 100%.
What are some of the river trips that are still on your bucket list?
God, I don't even know where to start. I ticked off some good ones this year. I'll start there. I ticked off some good ones.
Great place to start.
I finally paddled the Gates of Lador that goes through Dinosaur National Monument. I did that right after the Stillwater Canyon trip. And so that was a really, really fun one. And I I recently, just this past weekend, I paddled on the Arkansas River. I paddled Browns Canyon in my canoe, my OC1.
Nice. That's awesome.
I had paddled Browns Canyon before, but it was in a paddle raft. And so doing that, and those were like some really, really big ones that I had wanted to do for sure. And then some other ones on my list, I would be really interested in getting on the Yukon. Nell and I have been talking about maybe doing one of your Yukon trips, maybe 2024, 2025.
Heck yeah.
And then, so that one is a big one. I would love to, of course, do the Grand Canyon. I think that's like top of every boater's list. I've unsuccessfully applied for permits multiple times over the past few years. One of these years I'll get it. I know I will.
Totally.
Middle Fork of the Salmon is one that I really, really want to get on. Another Canadian river I haven't thought about in a long time, but something I would really like to canoe is the MaKenzie River.
That'd be awesome.
I remember you and me were talking years ago about the MaKenzie River, and I think at this point that river's pretty well explored. But
it's the largest river of North America. Runs north to the Arctic Ocean.
It does. And I think that would be such a liberating feeling, paddling a river all the way to the Arctic Ocean. I think that's got to be one of the most badass things you could do as an explorer.
When my buddy Jackson and I were looking into canoeing the Yukon River, we were going to do the MaKenzie, and we were, talking and, looking into it and trying to get details and beta and all this. And Jackson called, somehow he found like a canoe outfitter along the MaKenzie somewhere and called him and kind of explained to him our idea. And he's like, oh yeah, it sounds like a great trip, but it's pretty flat and muddy up here. He's like, have you ever looked at the Yukon River, eh? We're like, Yukon? No, never really heard of it. And then that set off the whole Yukon trip just from that conversation. It's like, Yukon River? No. He's like, oh yeah, you might want to check that out. It might be a little prettier. So yeah, we started looking into the Yukon, and we're like, oh man, this river has mountains, and it's in Alaska, and it looks amazing. And then rest was history.
Yeah, I remember when you went on that first Yukon trip. I unfortunately had to decline the invitation due to life circumstances that, of course, I now don't even remember. But it is kind of funny to think about sort of like how that started with you. I remember, and then you called me to join you on the Mississippi. And I just had just accepted a new job, and I wasn't really in a position to like take 3 months off, and I couldn't really do it. And then I remember like maybe a year or so went by, and I'm like, hey, what's the plan with that? Are you going to do it? And you're like, I can't find a partner. You know what? Fuck it. I'm going to do it solo. And I was like, all right, pal, good luck there. And then you did it, and you sent, and I was like, okay, cool. Well, didn't think he had it in him, but he made it all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And then I remember when you were talking about the Yukon River doing the whole thing, I'm like, okay, now Will actually has street cred. So, and he's doing it with a partner. So yeah, he'll be fine. Like, and then it's just kind of funny to see how,
they trace
like, Buffalo Roamer was like this Facebook group that you had started years ago.
Trace. And
it was just like a blog almost, just to like keep everyone updated on your trips.
Oh,
and
hey, I lost you there for a minute, but I just got you back.
Oh, cool. What was the last thing you heard me say?
I think we were just talking about how you didn't think I had it in me to do the miss.
Oh yeah, that's right. There you go. I did. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so didn't think you had it in you. And then you ended up doing the Yukon River, and I remember at that point you had street cred, and you had a partner, and at the time, Buffalo Roamer was just like this Facebook blog that you were doing.
Yeah.
And now it's like you like turn it into a business and a podcast. Yeah, so it's just kind of funny to like sort of see like the little evolutions of your friends' adventures as well. And then
Totally.
of course it inspires you to get after it. Like you did the Yukon, and I remember that was the year that I accepted the job to return to the Alaskan, because I told FOMO after you like quit your job, and then you did the Mississippi, and then I got offered to lead the Alaskan at Camp Manitowish in 2018. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to quit my job. Like Will's already done this before. It's not a big deal. Like I'll
Uh,
figure it out. And then
uh,
so I quit my job and I go on the Alaskan. And then that was the summer that you were paddling the Yukon.
yep.
And then
That's right.
I remember we passed through the town of Yellow River, or no,
Oh,
Yukon River, not Yellow River.
Yukon Crossing.
Yukon Crossing. We
Yes, where
passed
the
the town of
Dalton
Yukon
Highway.
Crossing.
Yeah, where the Dalton Highway
And
crosses the Yukon River.
yeah, and so we were riding the Dalton from Fairbanks to Coldfoot in order to get flown into the field. And then I ended up going there, and I'm like, oh, yeah, dude, Will's on the Yukon. I'm curious to know if he's crossed yet. And so I ended up like leaving you a note and drawing like they had like this cork board.
Yeah.
You walk into this cafe in the middle of nowhere, Canada, or middle of nowhere, Alaska,
Yep.
and there's like a couple people in there and some cooks in the kitchen. And so there was like this cork board, and I didn't even ask anyone's permission. I just like pinned this note on it and like drew a canoe that said Buffalo Roamer or something. I don't even
Yep.
remember what it was. And then at that point, because I didn't even know that you had not crossed at that point. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, there's a 50-50 chance he's going to find this. And so we'll
Funny.
see. And then you found it. You found the
Yes.
note. And then
Hilarious story too. Yeah. So it was it took us 70 days to paddle the Yukon River from start to finish. And we got to Yukon Crossing, maybe just roughly guessing, maybe day 50 or so. And so we're like tired, worn out. We've been looking forward to getting to Yukon Crossing because it was the only like, restaurant or like civilization, essentially, establishment within, months or maybe not months, but, days and days and days on our trip. So we've been dreaming of burger and all this stuff. And we walk up into the thing and into the restaurant. And my buddy Jackson's like, says there's a note here for Will Collins. I was like, what? In the middle of nowhere, random Alaska, Yukon Crossing. So I go up and I see the note, and then the steward, or not the stewardess, the hostess, nice young gal who had gone up there for the summer to work this summer job. She was like, "You're Will Collins?" I felt like a celebrity. I was like, yeah. She was like, "We've been holding on to this note for you for months." I was like, whoa. And then she turns to the cook in the back and she's like, "Will Collins is here." And I was like, man, this note must be really something. So she hands me the note. And like you said, it was a stick figure drawing of two people in a canoe. And I like open it up. It's like flabbergasted. Like, what is this? And I remember the first words. It said, "Hey, Willio." And immediately I knew it was like, oh, Trace. Trace left me a note here. And I was like, all it was like, "Hey, Willio, hope you're doing well. I'm expecting you to pick this note up maybe in the next couple days. Anyway, gotta run." There wasn't anything to it, but it was just like a hi. And it was so funny walking into that. And the people there were like, "Oh my gosh, the guy with the note is finally here to pick it up."
Dude, that was probably like the most exciting thing that those people had seen the entire summer, was like this note that just sat unattended for I don't even know how many months.
She was like,
2 months or whatever.
She's like, "I have to admit, we couldn't keep the suspense. We read it."
Yeah, I know. It's like, good thing I didn't write anything like weird or anything in there. Turns out, even in a place in the middle of nowhere, there's no privacy.
Yeah.
I forgot about that part. I forgot that they like opened the note. They just like couldn't even handle the suspense. Oh my god!
So fun.
Can't imagine.
Well, Trace, man, it's been a blast chatting with you. We'll have to do it again sometime down the line. I'd like to do a a live podcast sometime on a trip. I have the microphones to do it. I've brought it out on a Boundary Water trip. Funny enough, we're talking about the Boundary Waters, but I brought it out on a Boundary Water trip one time, but it didn't turn out that great. But I want to do like a live in-person podcast on a trip sometime. So we'll have to do that sometime when we're out camping.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I appreciate you having me on. It's always fun rehashing, talking about stories, and also talking a little shit to you as well. So yeah, that's
of course,
just kind of
course.
Yeah, it's kind of part of the territory.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times when the Bears lose, I have to text you that the Bears suck. So yeah. Anyway, we'll just keep that.
Wisconsin guy claims to be a Packers fan, but
yeah,
we'll save that for another day. Well, Trace, anything else you want to leave us with, man? It's been great chatting with you.
No, I don't really have anything else to say at this point. I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, peace on the waterways.
Peace on the waterways.